Welcome, Slayer the Alchemist, and welcome to another edition of Dudes Talking Metal. This is where we get some of the most knowledgeable metal dudes out there to join you here at the Lair to talk all things heavy metal and hard rock. And on today's episode, we are going to be discussing remixes, album remixes, what we think of them. Do we think it's a good thing? Do we think it's a bad thing? And then at the end, we're going to circle back around and we're going to give you all one album that we would like to see remixed. Now, I did a video a while back on the difference between a remix and a remaster. I'm going to leave that linked down below because people sometimes confuse this terminology. To summarize it really quickly, a remix is when the artist has the original mixing tapes. Those are the tapes that the band records on. The producer or whoever is able to adjust levels, add EQ, and things like that. So they have these original tapes. They go back in, they can change levels, they can re-EQ instruments, they can put things in the mix that maybe were there originally but never used in the original mix. A remaster is when you take the final product and you're just adding something to it after the fact, so to speak. You can't raise or lower the volume of any instruments. You can't bring something in that wasn't there before. You can do a remaster yourself by going to your stereo and turning the bass knob up. You've essentially remastered whatever you are listening to because you've added bass or treble or whatever EQ you want to the final product. Okay, so yeah, that's what we're talking about here. It's becoming a sort of a kind of a popular thing out there with these remixes. We've had Dio did a Holy Diver remix, Black Sabbath did a remix of Live Evil, of Technical Ecstasy. Thin Lizzy just recently released Jailbreak and Johnny the Fox in a remixed form. Did I mention Judas Priest Rock-a-Rolla? They released that. Queen is supposed to be doing a remix of their first album, Kiss, remixed Destroyer. So it seems to be becoming a thing. It should also be noted that not every band has access to these original tapes that they recorded their instruments on. I just posted an episode today from my new Iron Maiden podcast, A Pod Somewhere in Time, the video here on the channel. And we talk about the Soundhouse tapes. And this is a good example. Iron Maiden went in, recorded. They left. They had a miscommunication with the studio. Back in that day, tape was very expensive, which is what bands recorded on. And so the studio made a master tape, gave it to Iron Maiden, and erased the original mixing tapes. So Iron Maiden was unable to go back for the Soundhouse tapes and adjust or EQ things like they wanted to. So, okay, check out that video I have down there for a much more in-depth explanation on remixes and remasters. Tony, what are your thoughts on remixing albums?
I'm glad you pointed out the difference between the two because there's so much stuff that's come out over the years. It's just remastered. You know, you get that whole remastered series of the Judas Priest catalog or whatever. And I find in a lot of cases when I've compared the two that it's just more, it's almost like we talked about volume wars. It's just like they boosted the volume on it, but my original CD copy still sounds better than to remaster. Sometimes it has a kind of little I don't know, kind of a weird sound about it, like it's I don't know, some of this analog stuff that they go back and digitize. It doesn't transfer well. But that being said, the remixes, I like it when it's done properly and it's done as a standalone product. Case in point, you mentioned the Dio Holy Diver. They not only remixed it, they put it out as a standalone product with a new cover art, so it's like a different product. They did do the CD. That's the vinyl version, but the CD version came in a digibook, nice hardbound book, new cover art. You get the original Dio album, Holy Diver, remastered. In other words, so it's a little louder. But then you have the remix disc, which is this, and it's got an extra disc of like outtakes and bonuses and stuff, bonus tracks. But the remixes, you get to hear stuff brought up, like you were saying. Guitars are brought up a little bit here and there. Um, they let the tapes roll out until the ending. So if you hear a song like, for instance, Invisible
Hmm.
fades out on Vivian doing this blistering guitar solo, and you get about another minute or so of this solo as he just plays it out till he stops. And I just found that so cool. Being a fan of that record, just getting to hear more of it. And sometimes you'll hear they'll talking in between songs or count offs or stuff that it's got erased or whatever. So I was really happy with that one. I got the two Thin Lizzy, which you mentioned, the Jailbreak and the Johnny the Fox. Once again, they're standalone products. They actually put them out in a box set on CD, but if you buy them on vinyl, they're actually standalones, different cover art or altered cover art. They did some alterations on the cover as far as the colors go, color scheme. But they went back and they really sound good. They've added some extra stuff in on some of the songs that they pulled from maybe Phil had because they had demos for these songs, so they may change the vocal track to one that was on a different take. Like they did 4 takes of Jailbreak, and they take the lines out of the different takes to make the one song up, and they assemble it like that. They have a new Thin Lizzy has a new CD coming out. They just announced where they were saying that it's basically a bunch of songs from the first couple of albums that are going to be done acoustically with new acoustic tracks that are done by Brian Downey, the original guitarist. I mean, not Brian Downey, but what's his name? I'm having a brain fart. Original
Jack Doyle.
guitarist. Hmm.
Oh, Brian Robertson. Oh,
No,
Eric
Goran.
Eric Bell.
Eric Bell. I'm having a brain fart here, but
Oh,
Goran.
Eric Bell
okay.
has done. So
Oh,
they're
Bell.
all
Yeah, Eric Bell.
acoustic
Yeah.
tracks. Yeah, acoustic tracks that he's done. But I guess they're taking audio from previously recorded something, assembling something. But so there's a lot of that going on now. But I like it when they do what they did with the Jailbreaks and the Dio album, Holy Diver. I don't like when they go back and re-record stuff. Case in point, Blizzard of Oz and Diary of Madman that came out in the
Yeah.
early 2000s, where Sharon Osbourne just basically had Mike Borden and Robert Trujillo, who were the current band members, and Ozzy go back and re-record the bass and drum tracks and try to pass it off as a remastered or remixed album. That's just it just ruined history basically because if
Yeah.
those albums are recorded live in the studio, those musicians in a circle playing off each other, and it's just that vibe is gone. I don't like that. It messed with stuff when it's just they screwed up masterpieces there. In other words, they just went in there and threw paint on a Picasso or something. But one more I wanted to mention. Some of you guys may remember this. This was in the '90s when CDs. Every people start putting their stuff out on CD, their whole catalog. And ZZ Top hadn't started doing that yet,
Mm,
so they released the 6 pack,
yeah.
which is basically their first 6 albums minus I think it doesn't have what is it? DeGuayo, I think it's not on here. Yeah. And they went back and added in new drum tracks, and it sounds like 80s ZZ Top with those drum machines. So when
Yeah.
you hear it, the drums are very up in the mix and it's very modern sounding, but they just crapped all over the art of it. I mean, that's the original recordings that they've gone in and just, fucked with and screwed up basically. And this was the first one I ever got. And I remember listening to it at first going, something does not sound right. Because I remember just having, I think I had ZZ Top's greatest hits. So I knew a lot of the songs, but they sounded different. I thought, oh, they're probably just remastered or whatever. And then I found out sometime later that they had gone in and actually like
Yeah.
redubbed in drum tracks and stuff. And I had actually forgot about this until somebody actually brought this up on Facebook today. A guy had a question about remixing remastered albums, and he said, "What's worse to you, the Ozzy records or the ZZ Top 6 pack?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that 6 pack, man. I need to bring that up for our conversation tonight for this show." But yeah, so if it's done properly, I don't mind it, and especially if it's like I said, a standalone product with some extra tracks on it, or maybe some demos or something in a nice package. I don't mind it at all. It's just when you go in and try to just re-record stuff and pass it off as the original recording, I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. If it's something where they're actually really altering the sound, like that ZZ Top case where I believe they triggered the original drums, so it made them sound very electronic or
Hmm.
something. Yeah, or certainly the Ozzy Blizzard thing. But when it comes to everything else, I'm fine with it because I think it adds, I mean, let's face it, with these classic albums, they've all been remastered. They've all been in box sets with bonuses and stuff like that. So we're past this phase of, you remember when CDs first, like, I don't know, maybe this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the craze was like remasters with bonus discs and things like that. That was
Hmm.
really exciting. Then box sets became a thing. Well, that's all past. Most big bands have dried out whatever stuff they've got locked away in a vault and all that stuff. We don't need any more remasters of Paranoid. Well, then saying that they'll find a way to remaster it once again. So I find this interesting. If they have the original tapes and they want to go in and they do it in a way that's tasteful, Steve Wilson from Porcupine Tree is a guy that's done a lot of these. He's almost become synonymous with these. He did a lot of his 70s Jethro Tull catalog, even some of the 80s stuff like the A album. And Steve Wilson has a very gentle approach to it. I've seen him talk about this where he's basically just sort of trying to just bring out more what's in the recording. Now, some people approach it differently, like you mentioned that Dio recording where you're getting on Holy Diver, you're getting endings that faded out, you're getting the full ending. There's times where there's guitar parts that weren't on the original and stuff like that. The Thin Lizzy, like you mentioned, it sounds like there might be some different vocal takes on it. But I'm totally cool with it at this point with these bands and their catalogs. I just think it's interesting. It's fun. It's for the fans. I mean, you could say, well, maybe some kid's going to go in there and grab the remixed Holy Diver instead of the original. But how many kids are walking in buying stuff blind in a record store these days? I just don't think that that's an issue. This is mostly hardcore fans, the lifelong fans that are buying these things. And in some cases, Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak is a classic album, but I've never really liked the mix on that album. I've always felt it was thin. I always felt it was lacking in bass guitar, bass the instrument. And hearing Phil's bass now so clear and punchy in the mix makes such a huge difference on those songs. It makes it sound so much heavier, so much cooler. I mean, Running Back and Romeo, and I mean, God, man, just hearing his all the cool stuff that he did on the bass, it was just you could kind of hear it in the original, but it's kind of lost in the mix. So I'm okay with it. I do understand though with some fans, and I do think that there are some areas that you have to tread carefully. Like we're going to go around at the end and give a pick for an album we'd like to see remixed, and maybe this will be on one of our lists. It's not on mine. Sorry if it's on somebody else's list, but this is one that gets talked about all the time. It's Born Again from Black Sabbath. Darren, we've talked about this multiple times on the Sabbath Sunday. And this is one of those cases of be careful what you wish for because the cloudy, muddy nature of that album is almost what gives that album its charm. And it could be, I use the example all the time when I talk about these things. I say, go back and watch The Godfather and look at how dark those scenes are, how dimly lit those scenes are. When they're like sitting around talking business, it's like so dark and dimly lit. And if somebody did a modern, remix of The Godfather, they'd probably brighten all that up, clean it all up, but it wouldn't feel the same. It wouldn't be right. And that's what some of these records, you got to be careful because even though they may be quote inferior in some sonic way, by going back and changing it, you may lose some of the feel. I mean, so far, like with one Rockarola, at first when I heard it, I was like, oh, this is, it's taking away from the original. And then after listening to the remix a bunch of times and then jumping back to the original, I was like, whoa, the original is really cloudy. And I was like, nah, I like the remix. It brought a lot out of it for me. So I think at this phase with where bands are at, if they have access to these tapes, have fun with it. The fans are out there. Just as long as the original is still out there, you can still buy the original Holy Diver. You can still stream the original Holy Diver. Most of the time on the streaming service and stuff, the originals are still there. So it's not like they're deleting it from the catalog and no one can get it anymore. The originals are still there. This is just something for the fans. And it's fun, right? An album you've listened to a million times, like those Thin Lizzy records. I put the headphones on. I'm like, whoa, I never heard that before. Or, wow, listen to that cool bass fill. Did I never notice that before? And I mean, that was really exciting to me. I enjoy that. So I think it's generally a good thing. Of course, things can go wrong if it's not, just like anything else in life. If it's not done properly, it can be bad. But so far, all the remixes that I've heard, I enjoy it. I still got my originals, and the remix is just another way for me to hear and listen to and experience these classic albums. So, what do you think, Darren?
I think it's subjective. I think it depends on the album, and I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on the consumer. Um, I don't like the Holy Diver remix. I never listened to it. I bought it, listened to it once, and I'm good. I don't. There's so many things about the original album that I'm used to hearing, and I prefer to hear it that way. I mean, you could. I mean, and when we did our Holy Diver podcast, we talked about things that we weren't crazy about with the production, but this far into it, I I like hearing it that way. I'm used to hearing it that way. Um, I don't like the remix. I don't think the person that did the remix approached it in a way that made sense to me. And of course, I mean that Tony, you like it, and so some people do, some people don't. So it depends on the album. The one thing I think is good about some of these remixes is that it does reintroduce the album into the market. Some of these will end up on Spotify, and maybe a kid will discover Thin Lizzy, like what he or she hears, and purchase it. I mean, I'd like the fact that this music is now being upgraded in a way, probably much to the chagrin of the original fans, but for a new generation to keep this music alive and keep it relevant and keep it flowing, I think it's a good thing. So that's where I'm at peace with it. But for me personally, a lot of times I'm cool with remasters. I mean, in fact, there's a lot of remasters that I do like and I prefer over the original. Remixes, I'm really pretty finicky about. As soon as I see that something's been remixed, I kind of bristle a little bit. But I do like the two Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak, and Johnny the Fox. I think they came out really, really good. I think that they're an improvement over the original mixes. One of the reasons was there were some tapes that were recently added into the mixing process. So we have some different vocal takes, we have probably some different bass runs and things like that. So what you're hearing is the same songs, but it's almost like it's a different it's a different album from the one that we're all used to hearing, but the songs we're familiar with. So that's pretty cool. And in the case of those two albums, I will listen to the new remixes before I go back and listen to the original mixes, which is pretty rare. So that's good. And it also depends on who's doing it. You mentioned Steven Wilson from Porcupine Tree, and he's a prog guy, and he does a lot of prog stuff. He did the Jethro Tull, he did some King Crimson, if I'm not mistaken, and I know he did some Yes, and he approaches it in a manner that is very reverent to the original recordings. So he's very respectful about what he does, and there's certain things that he likes and respects. The original Eddie Offord, for instance, was the guy that produced the original um, Yes albums, Fragile, Close to the Edge, I think he did, and I think he also did the Yes album. Uh, so you would think that somebody who's a prog guy would be kind of daunted by taking these albums they're so well regarded and doing something with them that it's almost like a sacrilege. But I think Stephen Wilson is confident in the fact that well, he's confident in his ability, and he's also confident in that he's going to approach it with loving care, and he does. And his remixes are another case where I would say I prefer them probably over the original. Um, but it's hit or miss. But none of them are bad. None of the ones he's done are bad. Um, but as far as remixes, I mean, that's really taking a big step into the original integrity of the recording of the album and the way that and the older it is, the harder it is to adjust to hearing something a certain way, a different way. So I think that's the sticky point. But I think the good point is that when I made when we first started talking about it, that it does bring it into the current market and reintroduces it to a younger audience. And I think if as long as this music stays alive, even if it is remixed or remastered, as long as kids are discovering it and they're into Thin Lizzy, they're into Black Sabbath, they're into whoever Dio, and this is how they came across it. And I think it's a good thing. And we always have the choice. We can either buy something or not. And I often hear about these things referred to as cash grabs, and no one's grabbing cash out of your pocket. If you don't want it, don't buy it. But some people do. I mean, so like you said, John, it's fun. I mean, all curiosity will always get the better of me, and I'm always going to buy them. I'm probably not. I'll be surprised if I like it as much as the original, but I want to hear it. I want to hear different things, and there's always hope that I will get really into it and really excited about the remix. But it's just cool. It's fun. And like you said, we always have the original. It's not replacing. We're not taking something away and replacing it with this new thing. And it's always there. So if you don't like it, that's cool. Put it aside, like I did with Holy Diver. And listen to the original. It's not going anywhere. So I think it's a harmless thing
Yeah,
overall. It's my
good
opinion of it
points.
anyway.
I'd like to add to what you said. Being a fan of something, it's always cool to hear an alternate take or something. But in the case of the Dio and the Thin Lizzies, if I was telling a young person getting into these bands, I'd tell them to check out the original, to find a copy of the original and check it out before I
Yeah.
told them to
I think
check
they're
out a
gonna find.
remix.
I think Yeah, I think they'll probably find that on their own. I think. Well, if I was going to recommend it, I would recommend like for Holy Diver, I would recommend they listen to the original Holy Diver, but they might
Mm.
prefer the sheen that's on the remix more. Maybe that original mix of Holy Diver isn't going to grab them. It's not going to sound equal to the things that they're currently listening to. So it might be a better idea to get the more modern version to capture their interest and at least give them some similarity to the things they're already listening to,
Yeah,
and
possibly.
then
Yeah.
they can rediscover or they can
Mm.
discover the original mix on their own. Like, oh wow, this is the original version. They like the album a lot. They're gonna check it out anyway because like all of us. I mean, we once we like something, we get into it. We buy multiple versions, CD, cassette, vinyl, remixes,
Alternate cover.
remasters. I have so many different versions of Black Sabbath records and Judas Priest records and Iron Maiden records and things like that. It doesn't matter if something new comes out and it piques my curiosity, it piques my interest, I'm going to get it. So
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do a go around here of an album that we would like to see remixed. So, Tony, why don't you start?
Well, I am a child of the 80s and do love my 80s hard rock. And one that was listening to not long ago, and I said, this really needs a remix, not just a remaster. It's been remastered. I think it's Tooth and Nail by Talkin, which I
Mm.
think is their heaviest record, their most metal record. And I know Rock Candy's reissued it and they supposedly remastered it, but a lot of the Rock Candy stuff has just been the volumes boosted on it, is really all it is. They have nice packages and stuff and booklets and all, but sound wise, it's not that much different. This album's just always been kind of muddy sounding. I would love to hear the drums brought up and more, just more thump to the bass, the bottom end, and you could and separations of the guitar solos and the rhythm guitars to the lead stuff. It's just a very muddy sounding record to be a record that is a platinum selling record. But I've always liked it. Like I said, it's their heaviest record. I'd like to see that one redone for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've always felt like Jeff Pilson's bass, you can't hear it. It's like it's so you can sort
Buried.
of tell that there's something there, but it's just lacks any kind of clarity, any kind of heaviness to it. And not always, but a lot of those songs, it's done very much like the first Van Halen record, where it's just on the first Van Halen record, it's just Eddie playing live, and there's no like this is when you have one guitar in a band, most of the times they'll do two rhythm tracks, so there's one in each speaker. So tooth and nail, you get this thing where every now and then it's like there's just a guitar and one speaker, and the bass is so like transparent sounding. Like there's just it's like it's sort of there, but it's not there. So it sounds like it's just empty, like in the one speaker sometimes. It's really strange. If they
Yeah.
brought that bass out more, add a little grit maybe to the bass or something. And like you said, pan the guitars a little bit. And there's a lot of reverb and everything. Guitars are kind of somewhat distancy sounding at times. So yeah, that's a good pick.
Yeah. The Van
Okay.
Halen stuff was always having you always like you had the bass and drums in one speaker and the
Yeah.
guitar and drums in the other. Because I remember a friend having a car stereo that one of the speakers, one side of speakers didn't work, and all you could hear when you played Van Halen was bass and drums, and the guitar was like sounded like it was a million miles away. It's just the struggles we had growing up with that kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah, right. Oh, but it used to be fun. I remember I would sometimes turn just one speaker on,
Yeah,
like with
me
even if it
too.
was in like a two guitar band, like with AC/DC, they always panned it. Malcolm was in the left speaker, Angus was in the right speaker. So sometimes I would just turn it on the left speaker and just hear the song with just Malcolm playing, and I always found
Hmm.
that really fascinating. But all right, for me, I
Fun.
went with one that for me, Born Again was maybe too easy of a target, so I didn't go with Born Again. But I'm going to stay in the Black Sabbath universe. Ozzy's The Ultimate Sin. Uh, I always felt like the guitars are very fizzy or something on that record. I don't know how to describe it. There's like this sort of high-end brittleness to those guitars that just doesn't work. It's a very dry recording. The drums are very like cardboardy and whap, like when they hit the drums there's no kind of room or depth sound to it. I guess the bass doesn't sound terrible on it, but it's mainly the guitars on that record. They're just the guitars. I like that record, but sometimes I just can't listen to it. There's just this fizzy guitar sound, which is such a shame because with Darren and I have talked about this whenever we talk about Bark at the Moon, that we're always kind of like, I wish there was more guitar on Bark at the Moon. There's times where the keyboards wash everything out, and we're kind of like, where's the guitar? And then on the Ultimate Sin, it's sort of the opposite. There's a lot of guitars, but the guitars sound like crap. And I don't even know if there's keyboards on the. I'm assuming that there's somebody played keyboards on the Ultimate Sin. If there is, I can't really think of any song where it jumps out. So if the guitars were just given a better sound, mix the guitars differently, get the fizz and treble off of the guitars, maybe massage the keyboards in it to give it some presence, do something with those horrible 80s sounding drums. I think it would really change that record a lot. Add a little reverb to give the thing some atmosphere, a little darkness to the sound. And I think a lot of those songs like Killer of Giants, The Ultimate Sin, Lightning Strikes Again, Secret Loser, I think a lot of that stuff would, really benefit from that because they are good songs. It's just that it lacks any kind of atmosphere, and the guitar tone is just, I hate it. I hate the guitar tone on that record. So The Ultimate Sin, that's my candidate for a remix. How about you, Darren?
Okay, so can I do two? I have two because you started to talk about Bark at the Moon, and that was that was my pick.
Oh, okay.
Exactly what you said. The keyboards need to come down, the guitar needs to go up. I've always had issues with Bark at the Moon. I think that it's a keyboard dominated album from a band that is largely centered around guitar playing and guitarist and a vocalist. It's always been strange to me why the keyboards are so loud. I would love to hear the album with a louder guitar mix. And so my second one is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. So I'm staying within, like staying within the Sabbath universe here. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath while the songs are mixed well because there's a lot of instruments going on, and I think that the mixes are good. There's a very low master volume, and I think the volume
Mm,
from song to song is up and down. There isn't really, I don't get a sense of continuity from the first to the last song. I would like that to be balanced out, and I'd like it to be just a little bit louder. I'd like it to really pop out a bit more. Um, and that's going to be kind of a slippery slope because that album is mixed really well, but I think it could be done better, at least in the case of the master volume. But I think that there's probably some other things that are underneath the surface that we can kind of hear, but it would be cool to hear them a little louder. You know, we've got some woodwind instruments, we've got
yeah,
some acoustic guitar, things like that. I wouldn't mind hearing that just maybe a little bit louder, or somebody that probably Steven Wilson. I
yeah,
mean, because he's done other Sabbath stuff. I'd love to hear a version that he would do of a remix of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. I would feel pretty good about that. And of course, Born Again. I mean, who wouldn't want to hear Born Again? I mean, we've
yeah,
talked about it on our podcast. But like you said, whoever does that is going to have to keep in mind the tradition that it has. That some of that murky quality has to stay in there. It has to be intact. Otherwise, it's going to change the personality and the character of the album too much, and we don't want that. Um, but yeah, I mean, every album I think from probably the 70s into the 80s by today's standards has a lot of things that we could listen to and think, ah, they could do that so much better now. The technology has come so far from then that we could make this sound better. So I mean, you could pick a lot of things. I mean, that I think would be good to hear remixed. But Embark at the Moon and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath would be my top two.
yeah. That's a good one. All right, I'll give you another quick one that I had as a backup. And Tony, if you have one, you can go after me. And this would be a case of just a curiosity thing because I do like the mix on these, and I'm gonna have this as a three set here. The first three Blue Oyster Cult albums, the black and white Blue Oyster Cult albums, I'm fine with them the way they sound, and it would be strange if you only did one of them because they all kind of I always think of those three records together and sonically and production wise, they're similar to each other, but there is kind of a sound to them that it's kind of a love-hate thing. You either kind of like it or you don't, and it's sort of off-putting to some people. So I think it would be really interesting if they released the three, all three of them at the same time, remixed and done in kind of a different way. There is a Dolby Atmos mix. Now, this is a whole nother topic. We won't get into this right now. I did do a Dolby Atmos video. You can check that out. And Dolby Atmos sort of gives it like this 3D sound, and Apple Music has it. I'm not sure who else has it. But there's a Dolby Atmos mix of Tyranny and Mutation because there was an original quad mix of that, so they were able to take the quad mix and do it in Dolby Atmos. And just with regular stereo headphones, you hear all these things that were not in the original recording, background vocals, little guitar fills, guitar lines, and stuff like that. So yeah, for me, if I had another one, I would go with the black and white albums from Blue Oyster Cult. How about you, Tony? You got one to wrap this up?
How about Defenders of the Faith from Judas Priest? That's
Mm,
a another kind of muddy one that is kind of running together a little bit there. They did a remaster of Screaming for Vengeance, I know, a few years ago, and it sounds so much better. I'd love to hear Defenders done like that, especially bringing the bass and drums up in the mix.
mm.
Some of those 80s drums are kind of buried in the mix, so I would go with that one for sure. Yeah, Defenders of the Faith.
Definitely the drums on that one. This would be another topic. Maybe we'll do this like great albums with not so great mixes. That would be a fun topic. So, all right, but we're going to wrap it up here with so our thoughts on remixes. The dudes have spoken. Unfortunately, Butch wasn't able to join us this week. I'm sure we'll have him back next week. But yeah, so there's our thought on remixes. There's a few albums that we would like to see given the remix treatment. Let us know what you think of remixes down in the comments down below, and let us know some albums that you would like to see remixed. Let us know in the comments down below, and we'll see you at the next Dudes Talking Metal.